The chairman of the board stood at the center of the platform, holding a microphone. Beside him was a vacant seat reserved for the newly appointed president of the company. The room was quiet, filled with professionals, investors, and employees, listening closely. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. The chairman began. We are gathered here to witness an important leadership transition, a moment that marks a new era for this company. It is my honor to introduce to you the new president of Delaney Valamont Holdings Corporation. Everyone turned to each other with curious glances. Many among the audience were familiar faces. Sitting at the front were Daniel Valamont, Abby's ex-husband, and Clary Valamont, her half-sister. Both wore serious expressions, clueless as to who would be announced. Let us welcome Miss Abby Delaney. A chill swept through the hall. All eyes turned to the double doors that slowly opened. From the light pouring in from the hallway emerged Abby Delaney. She wore a formal suit, elegant, poised, and dignified. Her back was straight, and each step radiated unwavering confidence. Her eyes were fixed forward, not on Daniel, not on Clary, but on the future she had carved for herself. As she reached the center stage, the reactions on the faces of Daniel and Clary were hard to miss. Daniel had turned pale, visibly stunned. Clary gripped the edge of the table in shock. Abby smiled, not a smile of reconciliation, but the smile of someone who had long awaited this moment. She stood in the middle of the stage, took the microphone, and faced the room. "Good morning, everyone," she said. "I know many of you are surprised to see me here, especially some of you." She paused for a moment, sweeping her gaze over Daniel and Clary. "Allow me to reintroduce myself," she said with firm grace. "I am Abby Delaney, the rightful president of this company, not by accident, but by rightful claim. I am Mr. Hope. Let's rewind to the beginning." The night was silent except for the crashing waves slapping against the hull of the massive cruise ship. A light mist clung to the air, chilled by the wind. The deck was empty, except for 3 people. A woman who looked completely defeated, and 2 people she once thought she could trust with her life. Abby knelt on the cold wooden deck, trembling in fear. Before her stood her husband, Daniel, and her half-sister, Clary. Her eyes were flooded with disbelief, betrayal, and terror. "Daniel, Clary, please." Her voice was hoarse, breaking as tears streamed down her cheeks. "If I did something wrong, just tell me, but not like this." Clary stepped closer, her red dress rippling in the breeze. Under the glow of the dim deck lights, the necklace around her neck sparkled. Once Abby's, now Clary's. The crimson of Clary's dress mirrored the cruelty she and Daniel had planned. "Enough with the theatrics, sis," Clary said with a sinister smirk. "No one's going to feel sorry for you." She laughed bitterly. "It's just us and your husband out here, and no one's coming to save you." Abby's knees buckled. She turned desperately to Daniel, the man she had loved for years. "Daniel, you're my husband. How could you do this to me?" she sobbed, but Daniel's eyes were cold, void of love, void of remorse. "You need to disappear, Abby," he said, his voice as icy as the ocean wind. "You're in the way. You've always been in the way. You ruined everything we wanted." "I can't even be with Clary," he added, "because I'm tied to you. I've been miserable for years." Abby's heart shattered. She had suspected there was someone else. Daniel had grown cold, but she never imagined it would be her own half-sister, Clary, the very person she had loved like family. "Please," Abby whispered. "Clary, you're my sister. If I've ever hurt you, I never meant to. I'll give you whatever you want. Just, please don't kill me." "Stop begging," Clary sneered. "Nothing you say will change our minds." In a swift motion, Daniel shoved her. Abby screamed as her body was thrown into the air, her mouth open, but the wind devoured her cry. Her eyes widened in fear as she plummeted into the cold, rushing ocean. The impact stole her breath. The icy water consumed her instantly. She thrashed, trying to surface, but above the waterline, Daniel and Clary stared down at her, hand in hand, laughing. "She's gone," Clary said, chuckling. "We're finally free, Daniel. Now we can have everything we ever wanted." As Abby sank into the abyss, her trust, her love, her life, all fell with her. The darkness wrapped around her like a coffin. No one to save her. No hand reached down. She closed her eyes as the water filled her lungs. Abby shot upright in bed, gasping for breath. Her body was drenched in cold sweat. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the lamp beside her. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, panicked rhythm. "Abby!" She turned quickly to the voice. It was Arthur. He sat on the edge of the bed, concern etched deeply into his eyes as he watched her. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Abby didn't answer. She sat up quickly and wrapped her arms around Arthur, clinging to him like a lifeline in a storm. "It's okay," he whispered, holding her tightly. "I'm here. You're safe now." She still couldn't speak. She just held on to him, afraid that letting go would drag her back into the nightmare. "It was the same dream again, wasn't it?" Arthur asked softly, stroking her back. Abby nodded, a faint whimper escaping between her sobs. 8 years ago," she whispered. "And I still see it, again and again, how they pushed me, how they tried to erase me." Arthur gently brushed her hair back. "That nightmare is over, Abby," he said quietly. "They're gone. They can't hurt you anymore. You survived." "But why does it still feel real?" Abby asked, her voice low and trembling. "Why does it still hurt this much?" "Because it mattered," Arthur replied. "Because it broke you, and healing doesn't mean the pain disappears, but every time you wake up and realize you're still here, that means you're winning." She said nothing, but her shaking eased. She remained in Arthur's arms, letting the calm of his voice rock her like a lullaby. "You're safe," he repeated, "and you're not alone anymore, Abby." A few moments later, Arthur stepped away from the embrace. He placed his hand gently on her forehead to check her temperature. Feeling the heat still lingering, he quietly excused himself to get water and medicine. The room remained still as Arthur left. Abby sat alone on the bed, arms wrapped around herself, her voice drifting into the void. Her mind drifted again, back to the dark waves of that betrayal, the cold ocean where she was thrown, the eyes of 2 people she once held dearest, whose stares were the beginning of her destruction. "Daniel," she whispered, not realizing she had spoken his name out loud. Her eyes were still swollen. How could that man, to whom she gave her whole life, lie so easily? And Clary, her own half-sister, whom she had trusted to be on her side in any battle. "How could you do that to me?" she asked the silence. Years had passed since that night, years since she nearly died at the hands of the very people she loved most. Had it not been for Arthur, who happened to be sailing nearby that night, she would have never survived. She would have been gone, just like they planned. But Arthur was there, for her and for her son. Even now, while she was sick, it was Arthur who offered to care for her son, knowing she was too weak to do it alone. He had always been their refuge, the only one who truly looked after them. The door creaked open quietly. Arthur returned, carrying a glass of cold water and medicine. He walked over and gently handed it to her. "Here, drink this," he said, calmly. Abby, hands still trembling, accepted it and drank slowly. She could feel the cold trail down her throat, but the chill in her chest remained. After returning the glass, Arthur sat beside her and spoke softly. "I'm staying, Abby. I won't leave you, so don't be afraid." Tears welled in Abby's eyes again, not from fear, not from pain, but because of the warmth in his voice. He never gave up on her. She stayed quiet, her eyes fixed on Arthur, trying to understand what he was thinking behind those eyes that always seemed to understand her. She felt a warmth slowly spread through her chest. She had always known he loved her. He had made his intentions clear, but she still couldn't bring herself to return that love. "Arthur," she called out softly. Why haven't you left me?" He looked at her, not surprised, almost as if he had expected the question for a long time. "Because you matter to me," he answered. "And right now, you need someone who won't leave, someone who chooses you, even when you can't choose yourself. I know you've known that for a while." Abby didn't respond, not because she had nothing to say, but because she wasn't ready. Not yet. She knew Arthur deserved that love, but she still couldn't give it. Instead of being upset, Arthur just smiled, a patient, kind smile full of quiet hope. At that, Abby closed her eyes and lay back down. She took a slow, deep breath. When Arthur held her hand and gently squeezed it, she knew she didn't need to give him an answer just yet. What mattered most was, she was no longer alone. The morning sun was bright, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of flowering plants just outside her bedroom window. From inside, Abby could see two figures who brightened her world, Arthur and her son, Sixto. They were playing tag among the trees on the lawn. Laughter echoed as Sixto ran behind a large potted plant, trying to hide. "Where's Sixto? I don't see him," Arthur called out, pretending to struggle to find the boy. "Oh no, he disappeared." Abby almost burst into laughter as she watched them. Despite her fatigue and lingering weakness, she couldn't help but smile. A tender warmth bloomed in her chest. Sixto was happy, and Arthur was the reason. A moment later, Sixto popped out from hiding and ran straight to Arthur, laughing. "I'm here, you didn't see me." Arthur caught the boy, and they both fell into the grass, giggling. Unexpectedly, Sixto looked up at the window and saw his mum watching them. "Mommy," he shouted joyfully, waving, "come play with us." Abby instinctively stepped back from the window. Arthur noticed her hesitation immediately. He stood up, hugged the boy briefly, and spoke gently. "Hey, buddy, your mom's not feeling too well today. Let her rest, okay? She'll play with us when she's feeling better." Sixto frowned but didn't argue. He quickly ran to the house. A few moments later, the door to her room creaked open. Sixto stepped in, his small face filled with concern. "Mommy, are you okay?" he asked. Abby leaned down and brushed his hair gently. "Yes, baby, I'm okay," she answered softly. "I'm just not feeling well today, but I'll be better soon. Go play with your Uncle Arthur, okay?" "Okay, Mommy," the boy said with a bright smile, hugging her before running off again. A few moments later, Arthur came to her with a glass of water. "You should drink," he said, with a gentle smile. "You still look a bit weak." Abby took it and nodded. "Thank you," she murmured. "Thank you for taking care of Sixto too." "You don't have to thank me," Arthur replied, watching Sixto wave goodbye as he went back outside. "He's a good kid, just like his mom." Abby looked down briefly, trying to hide the small smile tugging at her lips. In moments like these, she felt like the people around her were slowly teaching her how to be happy again. And as she watched her son play under the sun, something quietly settled in her chest. Maybe it was time to start trusting again. The evening was quiet, with only the soft light from the living room casting shadows as Arthur prepared to leave. He wore a sleek black coat, clearly reluctant to go, but duty called. Beside him, Sixto clung tightly to his waist, clearly not ready to say goodbye. "Uncle Arthur, do you really have to go?" the boy asked in a hushed voice, his head bowed. Sadness filled his words. Arthur looked over at Abby, seeking her help with how to respond. Abby smiled gently and knelt in front of her son. "Sweetheart," she said, placing her hands on Sixto's shoulders. "Uncle Arthur has an important meeting tomorrow, so he can't stay here tonight. But he'll be back. He promised to visit tomorrow afternoon or the next day." Sixto turned to Arthur, who nodded and smiled. "Promise," Arthur said. "I'll be back, little man, and I'll bring you some goodies." Sixto's face lit up, and he gave Arthur another big hug. Then Arthur turned to Abby, whispered a quiet goodbye, and stepped out of the house. The next morning, bright sunlight streamed through the kitchen window. Abby was busy preparing breakfast, while Sixto sat at his small table, scribbling on a piece of paper. As he wrote out random letters, he suddenly spoke up. "Mommy." "Hmm?" Abby replied as she poured milk into a glass. "Do you love Uncle Arthur?" She froze, her eyes fixed on the glass in her hand. Slowly she set it down and turned toward her son. He was looking up at her, eyes serious and full of hope. "Why do you ask that, baby?" she asked softly. Sixto shrugged and let out a deep sigh. "Because he makes you smile, and he makes me happy too. If you love him, please tell me. I really want him to be my dad." Abby couldn't answer right away. What could she say to a child too young to understand the weight of everything she carried in her heart? She knelt down and wrapped her arms around him. She smiled, not a full smile, but enough to reassure him. "If that day ever comes," she said, "I'll tell you." Sixto nodded and hugged her back. That night, Sixto slept peacefully, clutching his favorite stuffed toy. Abby sat at the edge of the bed, silently watching her son's innocent face. The room was still, but her mind was a storm. How could she learn to love again when her heart was still so full of rage? Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she wiped them away quickly. She wanted Sixto to be happy, to grow up in a complete family. But every time she looked at him, the pain returned, memories of betrayal, of a man she trusted with her life, the father of her child, and the very woman who turned out to be his mistress, her own half-sister. She closed her eyes and prayed that in the nights to come, only angels would visit her dreams, not the tragedy of the past. Several days passed without Arthur visiting. He was caught up with work, managing the vast and well-known companies he owned. Sixto missed him terribly. He even begged his mom to go visit Arthur's penthouse. "Please, Mom, please," he pleaded, wearing his little backpack and looking up at her with puppy eyes. "Honey, your uncle might still be busy. Didn't you just talk to him on the phone yesterday? Isn't that enough?" "No, it's not," Sixto insisted. "I miss him, and he said before that I'm always welcome any time." Abby sighed in surrender and smiled. "All right, but behave, okay? Your uncle has work." Sixto lit up. "Yay, thank you, Mommy." His excitement was unmistakable. During the drive to the company, Abby could only shake her head with a soft smile. Sixto and Arthur had become inseparable. Just a few days apart, and Sixto acted like he couldn't survive. Arthur had always been the only father figure Sixto ever knew. Even during her pregnancy, Arthur had been there, supporting her, never leaving her side. Her ex-husband, Daniel, had no idea she was ever pregnant. That night on the cruise ship, when she was betrayed, that was supposed to be the moment she told him, but it never happened. And for Abby, it was for the best. Daniel had no place in Sixto's life. A man like him didn't deserve to be a father. Arthur was the one who saved her from death, the one who helped her start over. He gave her a new identity, a new name, and helped her build a successful life. She owed him everything, and she couldn't blame her son for loving Arthur so much. He truly was a good man. When they arrived in front of Del Rio Holdings, Arthur's company, Abby stepped out of the car, followed quickly by Sixto, who was brimming with excitement. He grabbed her hand and whispered how excited he was to surprise his uncle, who had no idea they were coming. As they entered the lobby, several employees looked their way. Some greeted them warmly. "Good morning, Ma'am. Good morning, Sixto." Abby nodded politely and smiled. Sixto waved at each person who greeted them. When they reached the executive floor, Abby knocked on Arthur's office door. His secretary answered. "Oh, Ms. Abby, Sixto, what a surprise," she greeted cheerfully. "Sorry for the intrusion. My son insisted we come," Abby said with a chuckle, patting Sixto's head. "No worries, ma'am. Please come in. He's in a meeting, but I think he needs this visit." Inside, Arthur sat at the head of the table, clearly irritated. He had one leg crossed and was staring down two men across the table. Documents were scattered before them, and the tension was thick. "I already told you, I won't approve this proposal without further review. Don't pressure me," Arthur said in a firm, cold tone. Then he looked up. The door opened, and in walked Abby and Sixto. Arthur's expression immediately changed. "Uncle Arthur!" Sixto shouted, running into the room. Arthur dropped everything and opened his arms. "Sixto, what are you doing here, buddy?" "I came with Mommy because I missed you," the boy replied, hugging him tightly. Arthur grinned from ear to ear. The men across the table exchanged surprised glances. It was the first time they had seen Mr. Del Rio act so warmly. The once tense office was now filled with light, joyful energy. "Well, you just came in time. You saved the room," Arthur joked as he tousled Sixto's hair. Abby chuckled quietly from the side and took a seat on the sofa. The secretary approached and offered them something to drink. "Would you like anything, Ms. Abby? Sixto?" "Orange juice, please," the boy answered cheerfully. One of the men at the meeting smiled and asked, "Is that your son?" Before Arthur could respond, Sixto spoke up while still hugging him. "Nope, but I want him to be my daddy." Everyone laughed at the boy's innocent reply. Abby shook her head, holding back a smile, while Arthur was momentarily speechless, smiling instead. "He's adorable," one of the men said, "and very brave to say what he feels." Abby noticed how the entire atmosphere in the room had shifted. Since their arrival, everything had lightened up. Days passed. One peaceful afternoon, Abby sat alone on a garden bench, holding a cup of tea. The weight of her thoughts lingered after she overheard a piece of news from one of the house staff, something that had long been kept from her. Arthur approached slowly. He wore a black polo shirt and slacks, simple but elegant. He paused beside her, then sighed before taking a seat. "Abby," he said quietly, as though he had something to confess. She turned to him again, reading the uncertainty in his eyes. "Is it true?" she asked softly. "Is it true your parents wanted to arrange your marriage to the child of one of their business partners?" Arthur nodded. "Yes." "And you said no?" "Yes." Abby frowned. "But why? I mean, wouldn't that have been good for your company? You'd strengthen ties with another major family. It opens doors for alliances, more investors. It's a win for everyone." Arthur stared into the distance before speaking slowly. "Maybe it's a win for the company, but not for me." Abby looked at him curiously. "I'm not going to marry someone I don't love," he said, his voice low but firm. "Do you know why I said no?" He took a deep breath and looked her in the eyes. "Because you're the only woman I want to marry." Abby's eyes widened. She froze in place, her heart thudding hard in her chest, but her mind was still clouded with uncertainty. "Arthur." "I'm serious, Abby," he said, staring at her steadily. "If this were a different life, I would have proposed to you a long time ago, but I knew you needed time, so I waited, and I'll keep waiting. I'm not committing to anyone else while you're the one my heart calls out for." Abby slowly lowered her eyes to the cup in her hand. "But I can't promise you anything," she said quietly. Her voice trembled just slightly. "I can't return your love, not right now." Arthur's face remained calm and understanding. He smiled, not a forced smile, but a soft, patient one, filled with hope. "I'm willing to wait," he said, "no matter how long, months, years. I don't care, as long as it's you in the end, as long as you're the woman I'm waiting for at the altar." Abby's lips quivered, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. "Don't try to convince me to take that deal," she said, her voice shaking. "If that's why you're saying this, let me stop you now. I'm not doing it. No matter how logical or beneficial it may seem, you're the only woman I'll wait for at that altar." They sat in silence. Only the chirping of crickets and the cold breeze rustling through the leaves could be heard. Abby felt like she was drowning in the weight of her emotions, while Arthur simply sat beside her, filled with patience and understanding. And in that quiet moment, beneath the garden lights, something shifted between them. It wasn't love yet, not from Abby, but it was a gentle acknowledgement. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she whispered. And that night, though there were no kisses and no promises, something began to grow. Trust, understanding, and a heart slowly learning to love again. Weeks passed, and Abby became increasingly focused on plans she had long been preparing. Eventually, the day of Sixto's school family day arrived. Sixto had been looking forward to having Arthur there, but unfortunately, Arthur had an emergency business meeting and wouldn't make it. The disappointment on Sixto's face was hard to ignore. Still, he tried to smile, understanding why his Uncle Arthur couldn't come. The school grounds were vibrant, filled with balloon decorations, heart-shaped paper cutouts, and large tarpaulins that read, "Family Day, our home, our heart." Children ran joyfully with their parents. Most kids had both Mum and Dad present. Off to the side, Abby sat quietly with Sixto, who had remained silent. He watched his classmates laughing, eating, and playing with their fathers. Their teacher, Ms. Rita, came over with a warm smile. "Sixto, where's your daddy?" she asked, then glanced at Abby. Sixto looked down. "He's not here," he said quietly. "Oh, that's all right. You two enjoy, okay?" Ms. Rita said before moving on to greet other families. Sixto turned to his mum. "Mummy, is Uncle Arthur really not coming?" Abby gently brushed her hand over his hair. "He said he couldn't, sweetheart. You know he had an emergency meeting. He explained that, right?" Sixto nodded sadly. "Don't be too sad. I'm here with you, and your uncle promised he'd make it up to you." Just as she finished speaking, a luxury car pulled up outside the gymnasium. Heads turned, including Abby's, and her breath caught when she saw Arthur step out. He was dressed in a navy blue button-down shirt tucked into black slacks, clearly just out of a meeting. In his hands were 2 bouquets, one filled with sunflowers and baby's breath. A familiar smile lit his face. Several parents whispered to each other, admiring his presence, but no one was happier than Sixto. "Daddy!" the boy cried, running straight toward Arthur. Abby couldn't stop herself from smiling. She hadn't expected Arthur to come, but he had done everything he could to be there. Arthur scooped up Sixto, who immediately wrapped his arms around his neck. Abby watched them, her heart warming at the sight. Carrying Sixto in his arms, Arthur approached Abby and handed them each a bouquet. "I thought you weren't coming," Abby said. "Luckily, I wrapped up work early and rushed over. I wasn't going to miss this big day for my favorite little guy," Arthur said, pinching Sixto's cheek. "Thank you for coming," Sixto said sweetly. "You're always welcome." "Come on, Daddy. I want to introduce you to my classmates. Sixto exclaimed. Arthur nodded, set the boy down, and took his hand as they walked toward the other kids. Some of them looked wide-eyed. "This is my daddy," Sixto announced proudly. "He's Arthur Del Rio." "Wow, that's your dad. I saw him in a magazine once," one child exclaimed. Teachers and parents exchanged glances. Ms. Rita approached with a smile. "Sir, welcome. Sixto is a sweet boy, and he's very proud of you," she said. Arthur nodded politely. "I'm proud of him too. He's a great kid." From her seat, Abby watched them and smiled. It wasn't forced, it was real. Soon, Arthur walked back over to her, still wearing his warm smile. "Thank you for coming," she told him, and on that joyful day, Abby's heart felt a quiet warmth, the embrace of a child for a man filling the void left by old wounds, and the happiness of the event only grew as the games began. The school gymnasium buzzed with excitement as games for children and parents began. Relay races, sack races, and musical chairs were all set up in the middle of the gym. Teachers enthusiastically encouraged the parents to participate, while the kids were all smiles, filled with energy. Abby, Sixto, and Arthur walked along the perimeter of the gym when Ms. Rita approached, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Del Rio, perfect timing. We need a dad for the kindergarten sack race. Please join us." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Sack race?" He glanced at Abby, who was trying hard not to laugh, and then at Sixto, whose eyes sparkled. "Daddy, please," the boy begged, gripping Arthur's arm. "Mommy will join too. We'll be a team." Arthur looked at the eager boy and sighed. "Okay," he said with a laugh, raising both hands. "You win." "Yay!" Sixto jumped up in excitement. Soon, participants were lining up for the sack race in parent-child pairs. The parents pulled on the burlap sacks, while the kids stood in front, ready to run together. Arthur had both legs in his sack, clearly not used to it, but game for the challenge. Abby stood beside him, trying not to burst into laughter, while Sixto beamed at them both. "Ready, set, go!" shouted the teacher. Everyone began hopping. Arthur was clumsy at first, but he quickly got into rhythm. Abby, holding Sixto's hand, ran beside them. They all laughed so hard they barely noticed who was winning. "What have I gotten myself into?" Arthur said between jumps. "Well, you're already here. Might as well do your best," Abby teased, running ahead. "Go, Daddy! Go, Mommy!" Sixto cheered as he bounced between them, unsure which one to pull forward. When they crossed the finish line, exhausted, they collapsed together on the mat, still laughing. Abby clutched her stomach, Arthur leaned against the sack, and Sixto kept bouncing in excitement. More games followed, the water relay, where Arthur got almost completely soaked, much to Sixto's delight and Abby's endless laughter. Then came the balloon pop game, where Arthur and Abby teamed up, popping balloons between their bodies, causing Abby's cheeks to flush with embarrassment. Later, for the pabitin game, Arthur lifted Sixto up to grab the prize he wanted. After all the games, the three of them sat under a tree near the gym, each holding an ice cream cone. Sixto leaned against Arthur's shoulder, his eyes closed, enjoying the cool treat. "I'm happy, Mommy," he whispered. "It feels like we're a real family." Abby glanced at Arthur, who was also looking at Sixto, a soft smile on his lips. "You know," Abby said softly, "I didn't think I'd enjoy this." Arthur nodded. "Me neither, but I'm really glad Sixto did." They looked at each other quietly. In that moment, though no words were spoken, the silence between them was full of meaning, as if through laughter, games, and a child's joy, fate was gently drawing them closer to each other. And that day, it wasn't just Sixto who was happy. The road was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of the car engine, gentle music playing on the radio, and the passing headlights of cars going the opposite way. In the back seat, Sixto sat between Abby and Arthur, cheerfully recounting the day's events. Even Arthur's driver couldn't help but smile at the boys' excitement. "That was so fun," Sixto said brightly, looking up at Arthur. "Uncle, I was really happy today." Arthur smiled warmly at him. "I'm glad to hear that." "Thank you for coming," Sixto added, hugging Arthur's arm. "You're welcome," Arthur said gently. "I'll always be there for you." Sixto grinned and suddenly reached up to kiss Arthur's cheek. Arthur, surprised, just smiled and ruffled the boy's hair. "You're a really cool daddy," Sixto whispered, before closing his eyes and snuggling closer to Arthur. A few moments later, they noticed that he had fallen fast asleep, still curled up against Arthur's chest, his small hand resting on Arthur's arm. From the other side of the car, Abby looked quietly at Arthur. In the dim light, her smile was soft, sincere, and full of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, almost inaudibly, not wanting to wake Sixto. Arthur turned to her. "For what?" "For being there, for showing up for him." Arthur nodded slowly, his expression gentle. "There's no place else I'd rather be." Abby didn't respond. She simply watched the man holding her son with such care, and for a brief, quiet moment, it was as if even her heart had found a place to rest. Though she couldn't say it out loud just yet, Arthur's presence had begun to feel like home amidst the turmoil inside her. Inside a modern office on the top floor of a high-rise building, Abby sat behind a sleek executive desk. She wore a fitted corporate dress that emphasized her authority and strength. In front of her was a tablet, its screen displaying a breaking news headline, "Former President Sells Company to Anonymous Private Investor." She smiled. This was the moment she had planned for, the step she had longed to take, and finally, after all this time, it was happening. After years of hiding and fighting back, it was time to face them again. Her secretary knocked lightly and stepped inside. "Ma'am, we're just a few hours away from your official introduction to the board as the new president," she informed her. "The media is already in the hall for the press conference." "All the board members and investors present?" Abby asked. "Yes, ma'am. Everyone's here. They're waiting." Abby nodded. "Good." Her secretary exited quietly. Abby stood up, still holding the tablet, and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling glass wall. She stopped in front of it, taking in the sweeping view of the city below, its buildings, roads, and people going about their lives. But her gaze wasn't casual. Her eyes were filled with determination, resolve, and a bitterness long buried. A sharp, unwavering smile crossed her face. This company, this was where it all began, where their laughter echoed while she suffered. They thought she would never rise again, that they could trample her completely, but now she was at the top. Now she held all the cards. She exhaled, not with exhaustion, but with release. She closed her eyes for a moment. When they opened again, they burned with fire. Now, she would make them feel the pain they left her with. She didn't come back to forgive. She came back to collect. Every tear, every fearful night, every stolen year. As she waited for the moment to be introduced as the company's new president, Arthur arrived, concern etched on his face. Abby sat on the sofa, a glass of red wine in hand, staring out the window at the glowing city skyline. Arthur sat beside her, also holding a glass, though untouched. His attention was focused solely on her. "Are you really ready to face your ex-husband and your sister again?" he asked quietly but seriously. Abby didn't answer right away. She stared into her wine, then took a slow sip before looking out again at the darkness that cloaked the city and her past. "I've always been ready," she finally said. "I've prepared for this for a long time. This wasn't a sudden decision, Arthur. I knew this day would come, and now it's here." Arthur remained silent, studying her face. Abby, who always looked unshakable, still bore invisible wounds underneath. "Are you sure this is about justice?" he asked softly, lowering his voice. "Are you sure revenge won't cost you even more?" Abby nodded slowly, then placed the glass down and looked straight at him. "I've wanted this for so long," she said firmly. "They conspired against me, humiliated me, destroyed my life, and while they thrived, living free, I nearly died." Arthur's chest tightened, watching the steely resolve in her expression. A quiet filled the room. Arthur wanted to stop her, to pull her back from what he feared might consume her, but he didn't know how. Abby noticed his silence. She sighed and gently tapped his hand. "You don't need to worry," she said, with a faint, resolute smile. Not one of happiness, but of certainty and readiness. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I wouldn't walk into a war I couldn't finish." Arthur looked at her. Even with the fear that she might get hurt again, he nodded. "If you ever need help," he said softly, "just tell me. I'm always willing to help." Abby smiled again, this time more tenderly, a kind of smile she rarely allowed herself to show. "I know you're always there," she said. "That's what gives me strength." The room was filled with important people: stockholders, board members, legal advisors, key employees. Everyone was dressed formally, seated seriously, waiting for the day's big announcement. At the center of the stage stood the chairman of the board, microphone in hand. Next to him was an empty chair reserved for the new president. The room fell silent as he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. We are here to witness a significant leadership transition, a moment that marks a new era for this company. It is my honor to introduce the new president of Delaney Valamont Holdings Corporation." Everyone turned to look at one another. Some of the faces in the audience were familiar, including Abby's ex-husband, Daniel Valamont, and her half-sister, Clary, the same woman who had once been his mistress and accomplice in an attempted murder. Both sat near the front, their expressions serious, completely unaware of who would be announced. "Let us all welcome Miss Abby Delaney." A cold wave swept through the room. All eyes shifted to the door as it slowly opened, and there, standing in the hallway light, was Abby. Dressed in a formal suit, elegant, dignified, she held her head high. Her posture was straight, her every step exuding confidence. Her eyes looked straight ahead, not at Daniel, not at Clary, but toward the future she had built with her own hands. As she reached the stage, the stunned reactions of the two at the front were impossible to miss. Daniel had gone pale, visibly in disbelief. Clary clutched the edge of the table in shock. Abby smiled, but it was not a smile of forgiveness. It was the smile of a woman who had waited a long time for this moment. She took the microphone, turned to face the audience, and spoke. "Good morning, everyone. I know many of you are surprised to see me here, especially some of you." She paused, scanning Daniel and Clary with her gaze. "Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Abby Delaney, the rightful president of this company. Not by accident, not by convenience, but by rightful claim." A low murmur ran through the crowd. Some asked questions, some were clearly shocked, a few immediately raised their hands. "Excuse me, ma'am, does that mean you've acquired full ownership of the company?" one asked. "Yes," Abby said firmly. "Through legal negotiations, corporate buyouts, and mergers, I now hold the majority shares. This company no longer belongs to the man who betrayed me, or the woman who stole from me. I'm simply reclaiming what was mine from the start." Daniel's face tightened. He turned to Clary, who was equally pale, unsure where to look. One thing was clear. They never saw this coming. They never imagined Abby would rise again, stronger than ever. "This isn't revenge," Abby continued. "This is correction, restoration. I'm not here to destroy what you built. I'm here to reclaim what I once helped build. And this time, I'll do it without either of you holding me back." She stood tall, her every word struck like a hammer, shattering the pride of those who once tried to break her. "I look forward to working with those who believe in integrity, transparency, and real leadership." "Thank you." Applause broke out. Not from all, but enough to show that a new chapter had begun. Abby Delaney, the woman once cast aside, was now leading the way forward, and at the back of the room stood Arthur, quiet but filled with admiration for the woman who had rebuilt herself from the ashes. Inside one of the conference rooms of the company, Daniel stood frozen, fists clenched, unable to believe what had just happened. Clary sat in one of the chairs, pale and wide-eyed, visibly shaken. Neither of them could speak. "I thought she was dead," Clary finally muttered, voice low and trembling. "We saw her fall. We watched her drown." Daniel turned to her sharply. "Then how is she standing out there? How did she survive?" Clary shook her head slowly. "I don't know. I don't understand." Daniel slammed his fist on the table. "And now she owns the company. Everything we worked for, gone." "It's not gone yet," Clary said, her voice bitter. "We still have shares. We still have influence." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Then we find a way to fight back." Clary looked away, but her face revealed doubt. "She's stronger now. She's not the same woman we pushed off that ship." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Then we'll have to play smarter. Find out who backed her, who helped her. She didn't get here alone." Outside the conference room, Abby walked confidently through the hallway with her assistant at her side. "Ma'am, reporters are requesting a one-on-one interview," the assistant said. "They're all asking how you managed to reclaim ownership so quickly and quietly." "Tell them I'll speak when I'm ready," Abby replied coolly. "Let them stay curious for now." As she passed through the corridor, employees stood respectfully, some even clapping softly. Abby responded with a polite nod, but inside she was focused. This was only the beginning. Later that day, in her office, Arthur arrived with coffee in hand. "I figured you could use this," he said, setting the cup on her desk. Abby looked up and smiled faintly. "Thanks." "You were amazing," he said, taking a seat across from her. "You really pulled it off." "I told you I would," she said, sipping the coffee. "But this isn't the end. It's just the start of what I have to do." Arthur leaned forward slightly. "Are you going to drive them out completely?" Abby looked out the window, her expression hardened. "They drove me to the edge of death, Arthur. And now they're going to watch me rise every single day until they realize they can't win anymore." Arthur nodded slowly. "Just don't lose yourself in this. I know you're doing what you have to do, but don't let it take all of you." Abby turned back to him, softer now. "I won't, because I have you, and I have Sixto. You two remind me of the life I built, separate from them, and I won't let their poison take that away from me." Arthur smiled. "Good, because the world already tried to take you down once. You don't owe it any more pieces of yourself." Abby returned his smile with one of her own, strong, resilient, and sure. Then she stood up, walked to the window, and stared down at the bustling city streets. From the top floor of the building once controlled by her enemies, she now stood in command. It wasn't just a victory, it was survival, justice, and a promise that she would never be silenced again. 2 weeks later, inside the executive lounge of Delaney Valamont Holdings, Daniel and Clary sat across from one another, both visibly uneasy. Their influence was slipping. One by one, their allies on the board were distancing themselves. She's dismantling everything, Clary muttered, her arms crossed tightly. Restructuring departments, reviewing all past deals, even freezing accounts. Daniel glared. She's humiliating us. She's being smart, Clary snapped, and now the board's siding with her because she's delivering results. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his temples. She's making us look like fools. Clary narrowed her eyes. We underestimated her. She won't stop, Daniel growled, unless we stop her first. A few floors above, in the presidential office, Abby reviewed a thick file filled with reports. She had been working tirelessly since her reinstatement. The company's books were cleaner, productivity was up, and the internal morale had shifted. Her assistant entered quietly. Ma'am, the audit results you requested are here. Thank you, Abby said, taking the file and opening it immediately. As she read through the numbers, her jaw tensed. Funds had been misappropriated, millions in unauthorized transfers from when Daniel and Clary were still in control. Some of the names attached were familiar, old allies of theirs, corporate shells, and fake vendors. Abby stood up abruptly. Schedule a board meeting immediately, she said. We're presenting these findings. That evening, at Abby's home, Arthur sat beside Sixto on the living room floor, helping him assemble a complex Lego structure. Sixto, in his usual cheerful voice, kept directing where each piece should go. No, this one goes on top, just like in the instructions. Arthur chuckled. You sure you don't want to be an engineer? Nope, I want to be a CEO like Mommy, Sixto said proudly. Arthur glanced toward the hallway where Abby had just stepped in. She leaned against the doorway, smiling at her son's words. Is that so? She asked playfully. What if Mommy wants to be an astronaut next year? Then I'll be a spaceship builder, Sixto replied, giggling. Abby walked over and sat on the floor beside them. You two look like you've been building for hours. He's relentless, Arthur said, pretending to wipe sweat from his forehead. I've been demoted to assistant builder. Abby laughed and looked at Arthur. Thank you. He smiled back. Anytime. Later that night, after Sixto had fallen asleep, Abby and Arthur sat together on the balcony, coffee mugs in hand. The city lights glowed beneath them. I'm calling a board meeting tomorrow, Abby said. There are financial discrepancies linked to Daniel and Clary. Arthur nodded slowly. Are you going to press charges? I might, Abby replied. They need to be held accountable, but more than that, I need them out, officially, legally. Arthur looked at her, quiet for a moment. You're doing this right, he said. Not out of revenge, but to protect what's yours. Abby stared out at the skyline. This company was built with my ideas, my strategies, my sacrifices, and they tried to erase me from it all. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Her words were calm, but powerful. The battle wasn't over, but Abby was no longer the woman who had been pushed aside. She was the one leading the charge. The boardroom was filled with hushed murmurs and shifting glances. A large screen displayed charts, transaction reports, and timelines. At the head of the long table stood Abby, firm and composed, with the company's legal counsel seated beside her. Daniel and Clary sat on one end of the table, stone-faced. Several other board members observed quietly. As you can see, Abby said, clicking through the final slides, there are multiple fund transfers tied to ghost companies. These were made during the previous administration, specifically during Daniel Valamont's term as president. A sharp murmur ran through the room. I have personally requested an internal audit, and the results are clear, she continued. Funds were funneled to accounts that have no legitimate business with this company. These findings are backed by certified forensic accountants. Clary's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. Daniel stared coldly, jaw clenched. One of the board members leaned forward. "And what do you recommend, Ms. Delaney?" "I'm formally filing a motion for a vote," Abby replied, "to remove Daniel Valamont and Clary Valamont from their remaining posts and revoke their voting rights, effective immediately." The board erupted into whispers. Daniel stood abruptly. "This is a witch hunt," he snapped. "You think you can just walk back in here and throw us out?" "I didn't throw you out," Abby said calmly. "The audit did. The truth did." Clary stood next to him. "This is all because of your grudge. You're making it personal." Abby turned to her, her voice low but sharp. "You made it personal the moment you helped him push me off that ship." The room fell dead silent. Several members turned to look at each other, startled. Abby didn't flinch. "You tried to erase me, but I survived, and now I'm here, reclaiming what you tried to steal." Daniel looked around the room, but no one came to his defense. The chairman of the board spoke next. "We'll proceed with the vote." One by one, the board members cast their votes, all in favor of Abby's motion. Daniel's face turned ashen. Clary could barely stand still. The chairman finalized the count. "Effective immediately, Daniel Valamont and Clary Valamont are hereby removed from their respective positions and stripped of all decision-making authority within Delaney Valamont Holdings." Daniel slammed his fist on the table and stormed out, Clary following close behind. Abby remained still, composed, her gaze fixed ahead. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was silent, precise. When the meeting adjourned, she stood at the window alone, arms folded, looking out at the city. Arthur soon entered, having waited outside the boardroom. "It's done," she said without turning. "I know," he replied. "I saw them leave." For a while they both stood quietly. Then Abby looked at him, her expression softer. "I thought I'd feel more triumphant," she said, "but I just feel at peace." Arthur stepped closer. "That's what happens when you win without stooping to their level." Abby gave a faint smile. "I didn't just survive them. I outlived their legacy." "You started your own," he said. "One worth remembering." She exhaled and finally allowed herself a moment to breathe, deeply, freely, as if years of pain had finally lifted off her shoulders. News of the board's decision spread fast. By morning, headlines filled business columns and news sites. Daniel Valamont ousted from Delaney Valamont Holdings in surprise turnaround. Abby Delaney reclaims leadership after years in exile. Inside her office, Abby sat calmly at her desk, her fingers skimming through more documents. Her assistant entered with a stack of letters and a few small parcels. "These came for you today, ma'am," she said. "Messages from industry peers, a few business groups, and some former clients." Abby accepted them with a nod. "Thank you." As her assistant left, Arthur entered with a cup of coffee and a small smile. "Congratulations," he said, handing it to her. "You're all over the news. Even the international press picked it up." Abby raised an eyebrow. "Let them talk." Arthur sat on the couch. "Well, they're not just talking. They're praising. You're being called a phoenix." Abby chuckled softly. "That's dramatic." "But true," Arthur replied. "You rose from the ashes, and everyone knows it." She turned back to the stack of letters. "I didn't do it to impress them." "I know," Arthur said, leaning forward. "You did it for yourself, and for Sixto." That name made her pause. She looked toward the framed photo on her desk, Sixto smiling widely beside a miniature robot he had built from scrap materials. "He deserves a clean future," Abby murmured. "And now he has it," Arthur said. "Because of you." Later that day, Abby went home early. When she arrived, Sixto ran into her arms like he always did. "Mommy," he beamed. "You're home." She lifted him up and hugged him tight. "I missed you." "Did you win at work today?" he asked excitedly. Abby smiled. "I did, and you know what? I think we should celebrate." "Pizza?" he asked hopefully. "Pizza," she confirmed. They spent the evening laughing, building puzzles and watching cartoons. For the first time in a long time, Abby felt light, like the future was hers again. And in that quiet home, far from the boardroom battles and corporate wars, she was just a mother who had won her life back. Inside a small hospital room, Clary sat with her hands folded in her lap, her gaze distant and unfocused. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. Daniel lay in the bed, pale and worn. The stress of recent weeks had taken a toll, his health spiraling after the corporate downfall. The scandal, the public disgrace, and the financial collapse had shattered the once proud executive. Clary looked at the man she had once conspired with. He was now barely able to move, relying on IV drips and sedatives. The door creaked open, and a nurse stepped in. "Time for his next dose," she said softly. Clary stood and stepped aside. She hadn't eaten all day. Her body ached, but she didn't complain. She simply watched as the nurse adjusted the IV, then left the room. She returned to her seat and stared at Daniel. "You promised me everything," she whispered. "You told me I'd be the one beside you in the end." Her voice cracked. "And now look at us." The only response was the quiet beeping of the machines. Meanwhile, at Delaney Valamont Holdings, Abby was attending to her final meetings for the day. Her calendar had been full, scheduling new partnerships, revising internal protocols, and expanding the company's future goals. After dismissing her last team, she leaned back in her chair, stretching briefly. Just then, her assistant entered. "Ma'am, someone's requesting to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important." Abby raised an eyebrow. "Who is it?" The assistant hesitated. "It's Clary Valamont." A long pause. Abby's fingers tensed slightly on the pen in her hand. Then she said evenly, "Let her in." A few seconds later, Clary stepped inside, her face drawn and tired. She was far from the glamorous figure she once was. No designer clothes, no expensive makeup, just a woman stripped of everything. Abby stood from her desk, but said nothing. Clary looked at her with eyes that held no arrogance, no spite, just emptiness. "I came to say, I'm sorry." Abby didn't respond. "I know it doesn't matter," Clary continued, swallowing hard. "I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed to say it." Still, Abby stayed silent. Clary lowered her eyes. "Daniel's dying. The doctors said he's not responding to treatment. His body's failing, and I—" Her voice cracked again. "I don't know what else to do." Abby's expression didn't change. "You're strong," Clary added, glancing up. "Stronger than I ever was. You survived everything we did to you, and you came back. Stronger." Abby took a breath, then spoke calmly. "You want me to forgive you?" Clary's lips parted, but no words came. "I don't," Abby said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." Clary slowly nodded. "I understand. But I don't need to hate you either," Abby added. "Because I'm done carrying that." Clary's shoulders sagged with silent defeat. "I wish I had made different choices," she whispered. Abby didn't answer that. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out. "You can go now," she said quietly. Clary nodded again and turned to leave. As she reached the door, Abby's voice called out behind her. "I hope you find peace," she said, "whatever that looks like." Clary paused, then walked out in silence. And just like that, the last ghost from Abby's past had finally left the room. 2 months later, spring had arrived. The air was fresh, the days were longer, and the sky stretched wide and blue above the quiet suburbs where Abby now lived with Sixto. The chaos that once ruled her life had finally settled into something gentle, manageable. That morning, Abby stood in the backyard garden in a pale lavender dress, trimming a few wild blooms that had sprouted near the fence. Sixto played a few feet away, building a small fort out of cardboard boxes with Arthur's help. Arthur wore rolled-up sleeves and a wide grin, struggling to tape one corner of the box together, while Sixto directed him like a seasoned architect. "No, no, the tower goes on the left side," Sixto insisted. "Yes, sir," Arthur replied, saluting dramatically, then laughing as the tape curled into a knot. Abby watched them for a moment before returning to her flowers. It was a normal day, no headlines, no drama, just peace. Later that afternoon, they sat around the dinner table. Sixto spoke animatedly about his new art project for school, and Arthur promised to help him build a spaceship from recycled bottles. Abby just smiled. When dinner was done and Sixto was tucked into bed, Arthur stepped out onto the porch, where Abby stood quietly watching the moon rise. He joined her in silence. "I never imagined this," she said softly. Arthur looked at her. "This quiet," she continued. "This kind of life. After everything, I never thought peace would be the hardest thing to accept." Arthur chuckled gently. "It's not hard, it's just unfamiliar." She looked at him, a rare vulnerability in her eyes. "What if I don't know what to do with happiness?" Arthur smiled. "Then let it teach you," he said. "Let it in. Let it stay." She nodded slowly and then, after a long pause, reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation. They stood there beneath the soft wash of moonlight side by side, no longer chasing vengeance, no longer haunted by the past, just two people who had chosen healing. And in that stillness, Abby Delaney smiled, not because she had won, but because she was free. Thank you for listening. It's Mr. Hope again. Subscribe to this channel for amazing stories.